Welcome. This is part of our Neapolitan sessions here at the Charleston Conference. You are in ballroom number 2 for The Secret Life of Articles. So if that's not where you're meant to be, now's the time. My name is Meg White. I'll be our moderator for the session, and I'm going to quickly turn it over to our wonderful panel of speakers. Just remind you, if you have questions, we are going to do our best to preserve some time at the end of the talks for those questions. Don't be shy. We'll invite you to approach the mic, and let's really get as much out of these 3 wonderful folks who are here to share with us today by giving them our questions at the end of the session. So with that, we are going to get started. It's exactly 10:30, and I will turn it over to Carol for The Secret Life of Articles.
Okay. Thank you. And I know that in the earlier session, the acoustics were a little problematic. I think this room's a little better, but if you have trouble hearing me, if I'm swallowing words or wander away from the microphone, as I sometimes do, raise your hand at me or make a sign, and I will remember to come back. So, for those of you who are regular Charleston attendees, and I know there are quite a few, some of you may remember that last year we introduced this Beyond Downloads project at a session, and introduced it. We were in the middle of collecting data. The project is complete now. At least the research aspect of it is complete. So I'm going to present some of the research, or at least some of the key takeaways from the project on article sharing. We're really looking at the idea of the impact, but more at the instances of sharing, some kind of digging deep into article sharing. And so I'll give you the results of the research project, and then Lorraine and Wouter are going to tell you about some of the practical implications from each of their perspectives, and some of the next steps that both Counter and Elsevier are doing. So I'm doing the research part, and they're doing the what happens next, or what's the implication. I do need to start by acknowledging that this was a wonderful team, cross kinds of organizations, and an international team, and I want to thank all of the team members. There are some others that are here. Hazel Woodward is in the front, and I think Anthony Watkinson is walking over here, and those of you I don't see right now, apologies, but we had a really quite wonderful team working together. So at the Beyond Downloads project, our real motivation is we wanted to know what are project counter reports missing. What are those download reports missing in terms of use? And we really wanted to look at this issue of how much do scholars share articles once they've downloaded something. How do they share? What do they share? And how much does that measure? Is there a way to measure total use of an article, not just downloads, which we've gotten down really well, thanks to Counter and lots of the extensions and things that libraries and publishers have done. But the assumption is that only tells part of the story now that we know that there's a lot of sharing going on. So are there ways to calculate or measure that sharing? And is it possible to look at a more complete measure of value? Because a lot of our implied measures of value of library collections, implied measure of value of journals or articles are based on amount of use. And if with sharing, if we're not measuring that complete use, how do we measure value in a more complete way? So those were kind of the motivations of all. Another motivation was to initiate discussion of these issues, and I think that certainly has succeeded, judging from the size of the crowd last year and this year as well, and the discussion will continue, I'm sure. We used several methods in the research portion of the project, and I'm going to talk about where we started, which was the focus groups and interviews. We did focus groups and interviews in both the U.S. and the U.K. We had a total of 29 participants, academics, but ranging from senior academics to PhD students. So we had a good mix of ages. We had less of a mix of subject disciplines. We're really science and social science. So I'm not going to give you a lot of conclusions about humanities scholars. We're really focusing on sciences and social sciences among our population. The focus groups helped inform an international survey we had responses from 69 different countries. About a quarter of them were from the U.S., but the other 3/4 were spread out everywhere. And yes, we really did have 1,000 responses. So 2 days before it was supposed to close, we had like 996 or something. And I said, let's keep it open till we have at least 1,000. As soon as it got to 1,000, we closed it because the math is really easy when it's 1,000. So it looks a little odd, but we don't have 1,000 to every question, but we did have 1,000 responses. Again, they're a good range, excluding humanities. We had just a few humanities, so it's mostly about a third are from sciences, and then the rest are medical sciences, engineering, social sciences. So that is our group that we're looking at. Good age range. They range in age from 18 to 83. The average age was 48, and about a quarter are 39 and under. So they do skew a little on the older side in terms of 40 and over. As you can imagine, we recorded in the interviews and the focus groups and the survey an incredibly wide range of opinions and behaviors when it comes to article sharing. Different motivations, different behaviors, different opinions, etc. So I'm going to give you a feel of some of that range, but also a feel of the things that I think are the main messages when you look at, or the main takeaways when you look at all of these results, and what do kind of the average or indicative sorts of behaviors and opinions tell us. So five key takeaways from my part. The first is that sharing of scholarship is a means to an end, and the end is not the sharing, the end is the scholarship or the science or getting work done. A little bit about function or purpose or motivation of this sharing drives the form or format of what is shared. The third is that email is still the most popular, is the most popular, number one choice. But version matters, and I'll show you that in a second. And the library is still key when it comes to initiating the sharing, but we'll look and see how the library fits in there. Okay, so first, means to an end. This is a word cloud from the question, how do you feel about your work being shared with others? And you'll notice there's some very interesting words in here, like happy, good, free, fine. We had 690 open-ended comments in the survey, and I must share that researchers and teachers, scholars like to share. It makes them feel good. They like to have their material shared. They like to share the works of others. Vast majority of the comments are positive. Only a few expressed reservations, and most of the reservations came with, if it's my work being shared, I want to make sure that the proper citation is included so I get credit for it. So it isn't negatives about the act of sharing. Very few comments in terms of worrying about whether it's legal or not legal, or whether it's appropriate or not. It makes me feel good to have my work shared, and it makes sense. We have a lot of from both the focus groups and the open-ended comments. We have a lot of really rich quotations and things that show what people are feeling. And again, scholars, why they share, they find it useful to further their scientific and academic discovery, to facilitate collaboration when it's their work, to further their own work. Sharing is often initiated by others who are interested in an author's work. They ask for something, and an author will share it, or they ask for something of somebody else, and they'll share it. And again, this message is that sharing is a natural part of scholarship. They share materials for good reason. It's part of what they've always done. It's just easier now, and they look for the ways that make it easy. The second most common reason is if somebody asks for a copy of an article, either of their own article or of somebody else's article that the person who's asking has a reason to believe that the person they're asking of may have a copy. And the idea is they're trying to get around a paywall, or if they don't have access. So this idea of helping a colleague fulfill an information need was mentioned by many. I share because one of my colleagues doesn't have a good collection or doesn't have access, or the cost per article is too high, so I'll share. whether or not it is strictly legal. And it was interesting in the focus groups to have people say, oh, I just thought it may not be legal, but what the heck, I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. So there are a couple messages here. Convenience, fitting in with their work, helping others are all more important than the letter of the law. And we also asked about embargoes, about what are reasonable embargoes, and the longer the embargo, the less reasonable people thought, although there wasn't much, there weren't many fans of any length of embargo, if I put it bluntly, but longer embargoes, we got a lot less people saying that they agreed. Scholars who work in a research group are more likely to share their articles or the works of others than those who work alone. So many of the scholars say that their sharing will increase. They expect it to increase or has increased over the last few years. And then if you put that together, I think it'll increase, plus the tendency of work to be done more often in research groups, the tendency of more co-authors on papers, this idea that sharing's going to increase anyway, but research groups are going to increase, collaborations increase. You put those two together, and I think we can pretty safely say that the instances and the amount of sharing will increase into the future. And add that to sharing becomes easier. I think that's a pretty safe assessment that people are going to share and find the need to share and find ways to share. So that leads me to the next point, that is function drives form. We assumed that sharing meant sharing the full text, but it doesn't always mean that. It became clear fairly early on that there's two main methods of sharing. One is to share just the citation, and that's, most people do that, they say, when the researchers that are in their group or who they're sharing with have easy access to the articles. So then they would likely share a link or a citation. Sharing the full document, and PDF is still the favored form of sharing a full text, is most common when access may be an issue or when it's easy to do. And so we found both. What's interesting about this when we're talking about calculating amount of sharing is when you share a citation, your downloads may go up. When you share the full text, your downloads may go down. So there's a little bit of balancing going on here. The instances of sharing full text, as reported, were still higher than the instances of sharing citations, so it doesn't quite balance out, but there is a bit of balancing. One thing drives usage statistics up, one thing drives usage statistics down. When we asked more details about their most recent shared link or reference, we found that when they're sharing by email, they say they share an average of about 11 times, 10 to 11 times per download. So every time for every download, it's about 10 more times the link or reference, so that might make it go up. For teaching, learning management software is the preferred method of sharing, and that's slightly higher, about 14 times per download. We asked also about full text. What's the average time of share for or how many times did you share the last full text you downloaded? And it's about the same. They share via email most commonly, about 11 times. And then full text is more likely to be shared on a research social network, for example, about 11 times. So no surprising now, after what I just said, that email is number one. But what surprised us is how much it's number one. Academics are not always the first to change. They do change if things are easier. And right now, for most of them, email is the fastest and easiest. Remember, sharing is not the main purpose. Sharing is to get to the main purpose of learning or helping their research. So if it's easier to share for research, for email, then they'll do it. About 74% said that email is their preferred method of sharing, followed by cloud services like Dropbox and then internal networks. Notice that things that you would expect, systems designed specifically for sharing, don't make those top three. Those come afterwards, both general social networks and research social networks. Doesn't mean that they're going away, but a lot of the comments express the idea there's so many choices right now. I'm not sure, it's just easier to send somebody something. when the choices settle down in research social networks and that becomes easier, then you expect these to get more popular. Doesn't mean they aren't using them, because clearly they are. It's just we ask, what's your preferred method? For teaching, email, again, by far number one, but in here number two is learning management systems sharing with students, and then internal networks number three. Again, the research sharing networks, both general and specific, come after those. However, if you look at the number of times you share and your preferred method versus the number of people you think are reached, you can't just do a calculator. So the number of people who are reached becomes in the hundreds or thousands people estimate, depending on the method. So if they want to reach hundreds or thousands, research social networks are going to reach a lot more people than email, for example, which is a more to one-to-one sharing. General social networks in the hundreds, as well as internal networks for more people. So if you think of, instead of one download equals 10 shares, 10 times I share, then I might share 10 times, but if it reaches hundreds, then I have to say times hundreds if I'm going to look at reading. So 1 times 10 times 100 is potential readership or potential people that this particular article is reaching. So the numbers get bigger depending on the method quite quickly. Version matters. There are some people in this audience that might not like to see this, but when sharing articles, either your own work or work of others, which version do you prefer to share? Guess what? It is the final published version. We had lots of people who commented it gets too confusing to have various kinds of preprints and accepted manuscripts and all of these other versions. I want to share the one that will be cited and the one that we know people will find again. So the final published version is what people prefer and want to share overwhelmingly of both their own and others' work. And again, lots of comments about this. This first comment, a main point is I want to share a version that has the publisher and journal stamp on it. I want to show that it is the final version. I particularly like this second quote. I'm a little fish, let them come for me. There was a fair amount of this kind of like, I'm just doing my job. I'm a little, it's not having that much of an impact. I'm going to do it and, just come if you will. There is another quote I wanted to read that's not here, but content providers in general have to realize that the relationship between seller and buyer has fundamentally changed in the last 20 years. In order to get someone to pay you for something they can get without your permission, you need to, 1, make the process of obtaining your product legally at least as effortless as the process of obtaining it illegally. And 2, make it so cheap that it's not worth pirating. Okay. Some very opinionated but perhaps wise scholars here. And since this project was done, some of you are aware of the hashtag ICANHAS PDF, which is this kind of freely share copyrighted papers. And the article describes it, the first one that I saw was, academics have found a way to access insanely expensive research papers for free. So there is this whole pirate bootleg kind of community that again to do. Okay. So the last is the library is key, sort of. We asked about the average number of downloads for your last research project and for your last teaching term. Put these together, assume 2 terms per year, and one project you have maybe 115, 120 downloads. Where those downloads come for research, the library is still, the library and publisher is still the number one. Teaching still number one, but less so. So this is where the downloads are coming. All these others are coming from other places. And just because the library downloads is a source of download doesn't mean that that's the complete source of your count of use, because we asked when you share it, when you return to that article, when you reread an article, most of them do not download again. Only 10 to 12% say they download again. What they do is they go to a saved copy. So people are saving, and so those download counts don't get to rereading, and they don't get to sharing, except for those few that links are shared. Okay, so let me wrap up my part and then turn it over to the others. Again, sharing is a natural kind of behavior of science. That download counts underestimate the true amount of use of articles, but sharing is done because it helps disseminate results, support research. People share in ways that are convenient, and they share because it's convenient. They don't want to stop and think, should I be doing this? How do I do this? I just want to do it. And any policies or measures from publishers, I think, must fit those preferences and the likely behavior, because you don't want to have putative kind of policies. You want to be part of that research conversation and not seen as an enemy, but seen as a partner. And again, I think downloads are really just the tip of the use iceberg. Let me turn it over now to Lorraine Estelle, who is the new director of Project Counter.
Good morning, everybody. Before I start, I would just say that I've been with Counter since June, and I'm speaking to slides which are not my work. They are the work of my predecessor, Peter Shepherd, who was the last director of Counter. So I just want to make clear that I'm not plagiarising his work. I'm giving him credit for it. So, in terms of Counter, what we have been looking at is calculating sharing metrics. Is it possible, and what are the approaches that could be taken? And clearly we could see from the project that there was a very wide range of sharing mechanisms, and all of them different, not comparable, and clearly we're in an area where there are no standards yet. And we also found from the project that the data collected is likely to go out of date very quickly. Two approaches can be considered when we're thinking about calculating sharing metrics. The database approach, employing usage data from publishers and citation data, where such data is comprehensive and reliable. So there are limits there, because that data has to exist. The other approach, a survey-based approach using online community as a basis for monitoring and sharing behaviour over time. Again, we have to think about how frequently that would have to happen, and therefore how feasible that would be. So really just looking at those problems in a bit more detail. Data on article sharing by formal and informal methods will be difficult to collect reliably, owing to the large number of channels used, and as I say, the lack of standards at the moment. The mix of sharing methods used varies from discipline to discipline and from year to year. And if we were to use a data-based approach, really it would seem to make sense to supplement that with the surveys from time to time. So we then really come to the question, is a sharing calculator possible? I think we can say that it's difficult, it's early days, and there are problems to address. And in the project we can see that there are outliers that really skew the results. And demographics matter a lot and make a big difference. So an approach that we have considered here is a range of sharing with a lower, using the lower range and upper range. And here in the table you can see this approach, and I think it's very useful, looking at the range across those different categories that Carol was telling us she found that the researchers were using. And again, we can see there, right at the top, email is the winner for sharing with the highest range. So that may be one approach that we could build on. Carol again pointed out demographics do matter, and it will be no surprise to hear that the younger the researcher, the less formal their methods for sharing. And again, I think, echoing what Carol said, the researchers of the slightly more mature years, more formal sharing, they post less, but when they do, they have greater reach. And of course, disciplinary differences, social scientists share more via social media. So they have really embraced it, those social scientists. So when we think, the original question of thinking about a calculator, can it be done? Well, any estimate on a number of times an article is shared per download depends on many things. There are lots of things going on there. An alternative to the exact calculator might be, as we said, that range of sharing for those different categories. And this range could in turn be combined with download numbers to estimate a level of actual post-downloaded usage. I am, while we're talking about sharing, just also going to use this presentation as an opportunity to just highlight two other projects that are going on in this sort of area, counter working with Crossref. So we have the debt and the dull, and if you get them confused, well, you're joining me there. I get them quite confused. So the DOI Event Tracking Initiative, really looking at creating an open, common infrastructure to track activities around DOIs, recording user content interactions. So articles, but also other items at the DOI level. And the Distributed Usage Logging Initiative, again, really very similar, infrastructure, but a peer-to-peer system for the exchange of usage data on user content interactions. So, for example, you might have the exchange of data from a publisher's platform and an institutional repository, and there you would see the use of an article in those two places. So I think that is those initiatives are something that we're working on, and which will also give us that wider picture. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to hand over to Wouter, who is going to tell you about his project.
Thank you. I guess hopefully everybody can hear me, and you probably immediately note my accent. I'm not American, I'm Dutch, so I'm sorry for that already. I'm also a product person, so that means that my job is to actually translate insights into products that lead to results. That's my life, that's what I like doing, and I particularly like doing that online. So I'm not going to talk about policy implications. There's actually another discussion later today that will discuss how sharing affects changing publisher policies. Highly advise you to attend that session as well if you're interested in that. I'm going to talk about product and researcher behavior and what this may mean for you as a librarian from my perspective being the publisher. So let me start with Mendeley, because as you may know, Mendeley was acquired by Elsevier a couple of years back, and Mendeley is a collaborative sharing platform. So actually, let me just give you some metrics of what sharing on Mendeley is doing. So sharing is growing. As you can see, from the start of Mendeley, sharing has grown tremendously, double-digit every year. So obviously, Mendeley is a popular tool and is growing in popularity. But aside from that, it's really the group, and this is just one picture. This is groups. They're growing tremendously. And a Mendeley group is a group where you invite others to privately share references and full text documents with others. It's very popular, as you can see. And then the articles they're sharing. That's growing even faster. So as you can see, the number of articles shared on Mendeley with other researchers is growing tremendously. Now, to Carol's research, this actually is the top of the iceberg, because most researchers share by mail. Now, our challenge is we actually wanted to make it so easy to share with others on platforms like Mendeley, and actually I'm broadening the scope here because it could be Mendeley, it can be Papers, can be ReadCube, but I mean our focus is of course Mendeley. We want to make it so easy that researchers will prefer to share on collaborative platforms that we can then use to improve their research and to help you as a librarian. So what I would like to talk about is 3 actions we've done. So first of all, we've created a My Research dashboard where we now feed back to the researcher what's happening with their article. Secondly, we're now testing an institutional dashboard where we're giving back to you as a librarian metrics about what's happening with the articles, including sharing and collaboration. And thirdly, we've joined forces with other publishers to create a movement to kind of outline principles, what constitutes simple, seamless, and good sharing. And all 3 I want to highlight quickly. So first of all, let me just show you some screenshots of the My Researcher dashboard. So, and I guess maybe in the back you can't completely read this. Resolution is always an issue. But basically, this tells the researcher how many views, how many citations of the articles that he has published with Elsevier and non-Elsevier. So this is the full world of your research. And why is this important? Well, particularly early career researchers have a hard time kind of establishing how they're doing, because they need to wait for the first citation, or they need to judge by the impact factor of the journal how well they're doing. Well, as you know, the first citation can take as long as 2 or 3 years, and the impact factor of the journal is a gross kind of collection of an aggregate result. It doesn't say anything about your success as a researcher on that particular research. So that's why we're starting to feed back these signals immediately after you've published your article, to get earlier signals about how you're doing, who's reading you, and what they're doing with your article. And that's also why sharing is so important. So this is feedback from Mendeley. So for example, this article has not just been downloaded and viewed many times, but it's also been added to a Mendeley library 548 times. And by the way, out of those times that people added it to their library, 16 people decided to share it in their group. Now that's a very strong signal and very strong, let's say, following of what happens with articles. First you glance in it, then you read it, then you deep read it, and then you decide to share it with your fellow collaborators. This is what we're doing with the sharing. We know that sharing is important, so therefore we thought we need to feed this back to the research community. When we presented this to a group of librarians last year, the first question we got is, hey, can we get this? And we're like, yeah, why not? So that leads me to the institutional dashboard. We believe that you as librarians should get better controls of what's happening with your authors, your readership, and what's happening around your institution. So we're creating this is actually mock-ups of a prototype that's now live at a couple of universities we're working with. We're creating a prototype where we, again, give you feedback about usage and statistics and stories about what's happening at your institution. But sharing and collaboration is important. So for example, this is the picture of the collaborations that happened at your institution internationally in the last 3 years. So we're trying to zoom out from the article and researcher level to an institutional level and help you understand what's happening with your authors. So, having said that, this is explaining why we believe it's really important to feedback sharing to researchers, to institutions, because it's happening and it's increasing, as the research showed. Now, it's an incomplete picture. So, for example, we can't track email usage. And we as Elsevier can't, for example, track what's happening with our documents on, for example, ResearchGate or academia. But we're talking to those platforms, and we're talking to other publishers. And what we said is actually, sharing isn't bad. Sharing is actually a good thing. Usually, and that is actually also what your research showed, usually researchers share amongst fellow researchers that are actually, we like them to read those articles. So we don't care that much about entitlements in research collaboration groups. We actually want to enable that as seamless as possible. So what we did is we got together with a group of publishers, and actually I happily see a couple of them sitting in this room, driven by the STM, to create principles for sharing for social collaborative networks. And this is difficult, right? Because what is an SCN? Well, we said, well, probably let's use a broad definition. We want to apply principles for sharing of articles on social collaborative networks. And what we did is, with that group and together with the STM, we came up with a set of initial principles. And we started a consultation, and that was back in March. And we asked the whole community, including you, for feedback. And actually a lot of feedback came. So what happened is 50, actually I think it was more than that, 52 people gave feedback from librarians, institutional repositories, SCNs, other publishers, and actually also we got a lot of response privately. All those responses were analyzed, and we actually said, okay, that's actually really valid feedback. So we changed the principles based on that consultation. And based on that, we have now come up with a new set of what we call voluntary principles, because anybody can sign up to it, where we say, first of all, publishers actually facilitate the dissemination and discovery of their author scholarly articles. That may sound very basic, but it's actually really important. It means that we actually want to help authors share their work and researchers share their insights with their collaborators. Sorry about that, that's my Dutch. Secondly, we say sharing should be allowed within a research collaboration group. It's really important. Sharing should be allowed. There should be no doubt about that. Any publisher that signs up to these principles allows sharing in private collaboration groups. Those groups can be of subscribers and non-subscribers. So we're actually okay with researchers that are entitled to share with other researchers that are not entitled. It's very important. That may sound like very trivial. It is actually a lot of the feedback we got, well, that's happening all the time already. But I did talk to some librarians, and they're worried to endorse some sharing tools because they're like, well, we know that sometimes illicit sharing is happening. And actually, through these policy changes we're going through, we're actually allowing this. So we're allowing you to endorse sharing and collaborative tools and to help your researchers do this. We even say, look, it can be researchers sharing with other researchers, and it can be researchers sharing with the wider public. That's okay as well. What we do say, commercial research is different. Commercial researchers from highly paid organizations, there's different tools, different mechanisms to facilitate that. There are already several platforms facilitating that. We do want to kind of follow those mechanisms. The only thing we're asking back in return is that those platforms that endorse this as well, we would like to follow and track the usage. We would like to work with Counter and Crossref to track the usage and sharing going on. Why? Because we want to feed that back in those dashboards that you've seen and in the reports to institutions. We want to use those signals to improve our recommendations engines. I was really impressed with the speech this morning by James O'Donnell with the Jedi sword, who said, your task as a librarian should be to help researchers with discovery. Well, the same holds for us. We're actually in that boat together. Our engines, our discovery engines, are power-fed by the user signals. That is why this is so important that we track those user signals, because our recommendations are worth nothing if we don't understand what's happening with the articles. And it's our responsibility to give good recommendations, to make researchers read less, because they need to read the proper stuff. So, we are actually working together on standards with all the standards organizations to make this more of a standard mechanism, and we're changing our policies to reflect these principles. So far, only, I should say only, actually in publisher time frame, it's actually amazing. Publishers are not that fast. 3 publishers have changed their policies, so this is Nature Springer, Elsevier and Wiley. But that's a large portion of articles out there. So I talk to other publishers. I hear rumors that more publishers will follow. So I think this is a good thing. So what I'm really asking you as a library community is, do you feel comfortable with this? Do you think this is the right direction? Do you feel that you're supportive of this? If so, I would really encourage you to endorse this movement, because we want to enable sharing. We want to help sharing. You can help me by endorsing this or leaving your feedback on the STM Association site. I'm sure this presentation will be shared at some point, so the links. But I think the simplest way to do it is if you Google for STM principles or STM consultation, you also land on this. The importance of this I can't underestimate. Because research sharing is increasing, Counter and Crossref are actively making this happen. What I would like from you is the support, so that we can clearly communicate to all the platforms and publishers out there that this is important. So please help me on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wouter, Carol, and Estelle. And are there questions from the audience now? Don't be shy, folks. This is Charleston. We've got a brave soul.
Steve Knowlton from the University of Memphis. This question for Dr. Tenopir. When you looked at and estimated the amount of sharing downstream, was there any indication of how much that sharing was intra-institutional versus outside the institution?
Not exactly. We didn't ask that. We asked internal network, but of course an internal network could be beyond. So we know the difference between internal network sharing, which was quite popular, and a lot, and then we asked about specific platforms for sharing. So we don't have that explicitly. We have some indications in comments, but I think that they're both happening. In an internal network, I think we could imply that a fair amount of that is within that institution, but it can't be 100% sure. So.
Future research question. That'd be very helpful for us trying to calculate cost per use and things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, we didn't ask that. But that's one thing. When you do these kind of studies, it always leads to 10 other questions that you need to ask. Thank you.
Can I maybe add to that? Because we do have the Mendeley figures, which is of course not representative, but at least it gives some figure. What we see is in the private groups, so the individual research groups, those are mostly from one particular institution, or maybe two, like an institution sharing with another institution. What we do see is the public sharing, which what we call is the showcasing. So I, as a researcher, want to showcase my articles on my profile. That is all extramural.
Other questions? And thank you very much for stating your name and where you're from. That's sort of a requirement here in the issue of full disclosure. We have another question.
Melissa Belvati, University of Prince Edward Island, Canada, which has different copyright laws, especially with regard to ILL, than the U.S. does. I'm struggling with, as someone who's always steeped in the statistics of my university's usage, whether I want to know these numbers or not. And it comes back to, why do I collect these numbers in the first place? For collection decision making? And is it really relevant to me if the article is used 10 times internally or not? Because I feel like we're getting towards where we're going to start carrying. So we still buy journals as volumes. We don't really, for the most part, buy them as individual articles. But if we start really heavily, I almost want to say padding our usage data with these duplicative uses of individual articles, I feel like it's taking our very definition of why we're collecting this data to another direction. And I saw some nodding up there, so I want to know what your thoughts are, all of you, about that.
Yeah, let me start, because yes, it is taking it into another direction, and of course it's an individual decision whether you want to go in that direction. But let me say there's two reasons that I think that direction is probably worth pursuing. The first is these kinds of data are used for collection development. They're also used to measure the value of what the library does. Is it, return on investment, whether it's value, showing downstream value. So it's a measure of downstream value of a collection, or it's a measure of more complete value. So if your downloads go down, does that mean that your value has gone down? No, because your downloads may have gone down because people are sharing and they don't need to so you've got to be a little bit careful only going by downloads if the downloads no longer capture total use. So it's a more complete measure of use, and it's an explanation perhaps of why download numbers may go down or affect downloads. So that's one reason. The other reason is it is a measure of value of access to information, and if our economic models change in terms of how journals or articles are purchased, it's kind of more forward thinking. We can't base our total value on assuming that the current method of subscription basis of articles is going to continue forever. So what is our role in providing access? And so it's kind of making the library think beyond that current economic model to look at what is a value that we can provide, and it's the value of access or discovery or tools. And it's beginning to think of that way.
All right, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, you can ask after. We're at 11:15, and we're on the move this year at Charleston. So we thank the audience. We especially thank our panel. And hopefully we'll see you at another session later on this afternoon.